Evgeny Morozov, the author of a new book, The Dark Side of Internet Freedom, The Net Delusion. Evgeny, you've been very critical of the US government's internet agenda. Before you, though, launch into your criticism, what is that agenda? I didn't know it had one.
Well, they claim they have one. As I've mentioned, there was this very big prominent speech that Hillary Clinton delivered in early January 2010, which inaugurated this agenda, and where she spoke about internet freedom becoming a new foreign policy priority for the US government. And she announced there will be money available for various projects. Some of them will be fighting censorship, some of them will be fostering what she dubs civil society 2.0. So there is definitely an agenda. It may not be a very coherent agenda, but there is one. My criticism of this is, rests on several levels. First of all, I think the way in which Hillary Clinton articulated the priorities for, and the way in which even she conceptualized this space is very much heavily influenced by the experience of the Cold War. She spoke at length about the information curtain that is falling. She spoke at length about virtual walls. She mentioned, bloggers as, disseminators of some is that. I mean, there is definitely that Cold War baggage that a lot of policymakers in DC especially bring to this issue.
Didn't America win the Cold War, and isn't that a good thing?
Well, that's what some people believe.
You don't
and
believe
those
that?
people are not historians, as it happens.
You don't believe America won the Cold War?
No, I don't believe that. And I don't believe that Ronald Reagan won the Cold War, nor do I believe that Radio Free Europe won the Cold War. I mean, some of them played a role. Radio Free Europe, for example, did play a role. It may not have been the role. It may not have been the most crucial contribution that America made. And I think it was the collapse of the Soviet Union, if you really want to look at it historically, was a factor of various historical and structural forces. The collapse of the Soviet economy, its inability to compete with NATO, many others. The problem is that there is this assumption that many people make, is that the moment we open up the gates and the moment we let new version of Radio Free Europe, which is blogging and tweeting, into those countries, walls will fall. So all we have to do is just to, break through the Chinese firewall, and suddenly the Chinese people will rebel, form alliances, and start opposing their government. This is not going to happen, and that wouldn't even have happened if it was the case in the Soviet Union. So that is part of my criticism, that we are rooting it in very wrong and inappropriate metaphors that misread the Cold War, but they also misread the current nature of the internet. Because bloggers are not dissidents, and bloggers are not always some is that. If you look at a country like Iran, many of their bloggers are actually more conservative than Ahmadinejad. It was not the case with people who produced some is that in the Soviet Union, all of whom were against their government. But the second point I'm making in terms of criticizing them is that, any move that the US government makes in this space will have huge political consequences. Because again, it will be interpreted by authoritarian governments as an attempt at regime change. So, the reason why the Russians and the Iranians and the Chinese are now so concerned about Google and Facebook and Twitter is because those are American companies, and the American government has expressed a desire to use the internet to push for freedom and democracy. So what they end up doing is, restricting what Google, Facebook, and Twitter can do domestically. Some of them kick those companies out completely. Some of them create local alternatives, and some just go and arrest bloggers because they actually buy into the narrative which comes out of Washington, which portrays all bloggers as dissidents.
But isn't it in America's interest and in everyone's interest to get rid of the tyrants in these countries?
Oh, of course it's in everyone's interest, but the question then is, what are the procedures and policies you need to have in place? If what ends up happening in Iran or Russia is that the government completely cracks down on the internet, shuts down on internet cafes, engages in more surveillance, kicks Google out and creates its local government-controlled search engine, that is not clear to me how exactly that promotes American interests. And I think this is the step which the current internet policy has not really addressed yet. We would not necessarily contribute to the downfall of dictators in Iran or Russia simply by politicizing this issue. Just like sanctions against Cuba has not had much of an effect, or sanctions against Iran. Again, draining them out of resources sometimes can actually only entrench them in power because it adds legitimacy and popular support for them domestically.